My name is Claire Donovan. I'm 36 years old, a decorated officer in the United States Navy, and I've spent nearly my whole life proving I belong in a place where only a handful of women ever stand. I thought I had weathered the worst storms. I believed I understood what betrayal felt like. I was wrong. Worthless soldier. My father's voice exploded across the military tribunal, sharp and unforgiving, slicing through the air like a rifle crack. The words froze the room. Every head turned toward me, the weight of their stares pressing against the scars on my chest that still throbbed like fresh wounds. My father, a retired colonel with more medals than I could ever list, stood on the witness stand, pointing at me as if I were some fraud wearing his uniform. "Take off your uniform," he demanded, his voice breaking even as he tried to hide it. For a moment, I wondered if this could really be happening. The presiding judge arched a brow. Pens stopped scratching across paper. Even the faint hum of the ventilation seemed to vanish. The shame didn't cut deep because I believed him, it came from something far more painful. The man who taught me to shoot straight, to square my shoulders, to never waver, was now tearing me down in front of everyone. My breath caught, a stabbing reminder of the scar tissue beneath my ribs, marks carved there during a mission that should have ended my life. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I refused to cry. I would not give him that satisfaction. The chair screeched as I rose to my feet. The tribunal chamber smelled of polished wood and cold steel, and for a moment, my mind hurled me back into that jungle, crawling through mud, bleeding, fighting for each breath. My father's words echoed again, but I stayed silent. My silence carried more weight than any argument. I drew in a slow breath, my hands shaking as I worked the buttons on my jacket. The whole fell into a hush so thick it felt solid. No one moved. No one dared. I unbuttoned my dress blues with deliberate slowness, my motions steady and mechanical. Sliding the jacket off, I felt the atmosphere shift. My undershirt clung to me, damp from tension, but I didn't stop. I lifted the fabric just enough for the truth to speak without words. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The scars running across my ribs were jagged and brutal, twisting like scorched rope across pale skin. 2 hardened lumps, fragments of metal surgeons couldn't remove without killing me, pushed against the flesh. They were as much a part of me as my heartbeat. It was Admiral Hughes who finally broke the silence. His commanding tone faltered. "Those scars, my God." He rose slowly, his eyes locking with mine, not seeing me as just a soldier, but as someone who had walked through hell and come back carrying pieces of it inside her. My father staggered back, the color draining from his face. The fire in his eyes evaporated, replaced by something brittle, fear and regret. His lips moved like he wanted to speak, but no sound came. His own accusation had shattered him. He sank back into his seat, staring at the floor as if it could swallow him whole. I stood exposed, but I didn't flinch. Let them see. Let them understand what no commendation or report could capture. These scars weren't medals, they were the evidence of every yard I crawled, every teammate I dragged through the mud when I should have been dead. The judges held their pens midair. The silence weighed more than any verdict. I lowered my shirt and fastened my jacket, my hands steady now. When I spoke, my voice was calm, cold, and heavy with years of buried pain. "You call me worthless," I said, looking at my father, "but I survived a mission no one else was supposed to live through. I carried men twice my size out of that jungle while bleeding through my own uniform. I didn't fight for medals, I fought for lives." His shoulders sagged. He looked older, smaller, crushed under the weight of his own words. He couldn't meet my eyes. I let the silence linger before I spoke again. My mind flashed back to that night, the crack of gunfire, the stench of burning foliage, the scream of a man I refused to leave behind. Every step felt like my last. The pain in my ribs was so sharp I thought I'd drop before reaching the extraction point. But I didn't. Someone had to make it. The tribunal watched me as if I were a ghost. They had read about the mission, but they didn't know the truth, the chaos, the betrayal, the fact that we'd been sent straight into an ambush no one would acknowledge. Those scars were my only proof it was real. I swept my gaze across the room. How could a father call his own daughter worthless when her body carried the story he never had the courage to hear? My words weren't only for him, they were for every officer, every judge in that chamber. Admiral Hughes cleared his throat. His voice was quiet but resolute. "Lieutenant Donovan, we need to hear your account." I squared my jacket and stepped forward. If they wanted the truth, I would give it, all of it. Starting with the night I should have died. The tribunal adjourned in a low storm of whispers and sidelong glances, but Hughes's eyes stayed locked on me. He approached with measured steps, his expression unreadable. "Lieutenant Donovan," he said quietly, "come with me." His tone left no room for refusal. I followed him down a long corridor lined with portraits of men who built their legacies on valor. I wondered how many bore scars hidden beneath pristine uniforms, and how many stories had been buried to protect appearances. The private room was stark, steel-gray walls, a single table, a notepad resting in the center. Hughes gestured for me to sit, then took the chair opposite, leaning forward with both hands on the table. "I need the truth," he said, his voice low but unyielding. "About what really happened." My breath caught. Truth could cut deeper than shrapnel. I had practiced my answers for months, each time someone tried to chalk my survival up to blind luck. But with his gaze fixed on me, the weight of that night came rushing back. Before I could speak, my father's voice echoed in my mind, just as sharp as the day he said it. "Don't turn failure into an excuse, Claire. A soldier either completes the mission or dies trying." Those words had been seared into me since childhood. To him, blood and broken bones didn't matter. Only victory did. "I almost died," I said at last, my tone even but laced with something raw. "We were sent into an operation that was doomed before it began. They told us it would be a clean extraction. No resistance. No risks." I paused, my fingers curling against the table. But the jungle was waiting for us. It wasn't just bad intel, it felt like we'd been led straight into a trap. Hughes's eyes narrowed, as though he'd been expecting that. "Go on," he urged, his voice carrying the weight of both command and suspicion, like he already knew the report wasn't the full story. "The report claims I followed standard protocol," he said, his words careful but probing. "But everything you've told me says otherwise. What's missing from the record, Lieutenant?" I drew in a deep breath, steadying the storm inside me. "Almost everything that truly happened," I replied, my voice low but firm. "The official record says we deployed at 2100 hours. But I remember checking my watch as we lifted off. Our boots hit the dirt at 2038. Someone had tampered with the timeline, slicing away almost a full half hour. Hughes's brow furrowed. 29 minutes? That's not a clerical slip." "What else?" he pressed. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to bury it, to keep the memories locked where they couldn't hurt me. But silence had already cost too much. "We were supposed to have a secondary support unit," I began. "They were meant to track our movement remotely, feeding us intel as we advanced. But barely 6 minutes into the jungle, their signal was gone. No updates, no coordinates, like they'd vanished from the map entirely." Hughes's expression darkened, his knuckles tightening against the tabletop. "That's not in the report," he said, almost to himself. "No, sir," I confirmed. "The report talks about an ambush, about my so-called exceptional courage under fire, but it never explains why we walked straight into a kill zone without warning. I still don't know why we went in without proper backup. None of it adds up, not the dead comms, not the corrupted intel, not the missing half hour." The air in the room felt heavier, the walls closer, as if the truth itself were pressing in on us. I searched Hughes's face for any flicker of recognition, any sign he knew more than he was saying. "I wish I could give you clear answers," I said finally, my voice low. "But even I don't understand how it unraveled so completely. All I know is, it felt deliberate, like someone wanted us to fail." He leaned back, eyes narrowing with thought. "Then we start by finding out who rewrote your mission before you even set foot on that ground." His gaze sharpened, the silence between us weighted. "Lieutenant," he said slowly, "this is starting to look like more than bad intel. Someone wanted this buried." The words hung in the sterile air, sharp as shrapnel. I could almost hear the calculations running through his head, answers he wasn't ready to say out loud. He tapped the table twice, then leaned in again. "Who could have had access to your mission orders?" I paused. My mind went back to the morning before deployment, when my father called me into his office. His jaw had been locked tight, eyes colder than usual. "Not every order needs questioning," he'd said flatly. "Follow it, Claire. Don't ask why." "I can't be certain," I told Hughes, my tone tense. But my father still had connections, old friends in advisory roles. One of them sat on the approval board for that mission. General Harris. Saying his name made my stomach knot. Harris had known me since I was a kid, always quick to brag about my father's record. Hughes's eyes narrowed. Harris signed the operation logs. I saw his name in the chain of command. A cold shiver ran through me. Suddenly, that unreadable look my father had given me before the mission made horrifying sense. Had he known? Had he suspected? Before I left, he told me, "Don't screw this one up." That time, it had felt different. Like he knew something was waiting for me. I'd brushed it off as his usual hard edge, but now? I wasn't so sure. "We're not looking at coincidence," Hughes said quietly, decisively. "This is a cover-up. And it might involve people you and I both know." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a small black USB drive, heavier than its size should allow. It felt like it carried every unanswered question. "This," I said, my voice firm, "is everything I managed to salvage. Raw comm logs, satellite timestamps, partial GPS trails. I copied them before the official files were locked." Hughes's brows pulled tight as he took it. "You kept this?" "Yes, sir. The official report is missing entire segments. The only reason I made it back alive is because I noticed every irregular signal that night. When I recovered, I pulled whatever I could from our gear before it was wiped for security purposes. I didn't trust the truth to survive otherwise." He plugged it into his secure laptop, scrolling with quick, deliberate keystrokes. I watched his face shift, from curiosity, to concern, to something darker. He stopped on one log, his eyes narrowing. "The official record says you deployed at 2100, he said slowly. "But this raw data shows you were on the ground at 2038. That's a 22-minute gap." "Keep looking," I murmured. He clicked again, and his face drained. "There's a missing block, 42 minutes gone. The logs jump from 2110 to 2152. No comms, no telemetry. It's like someone cut out the heart of the op." My chest tightened. Hearing it aloud was like stepping back into the nightmare. "That's when the ambush happened," I said. "The chaos, the screams, the calls for help, they're gone. Erased." "This isn't negligence," Hughes said, jaw tight. "Someone scrubbed it clean. Someone didn't want the truth out." I leaned in, locking eyes with him. "Now you see why I can't let it go. That missing time cost lives. And I will find out who's responsible." The smell of burned gunpowder still lingers in my memory, sharp, metallic, mixed with the damp, heavy scent of jungle earth. I remember my boots hitting the ground after the hello drop, rotor wash whipping dirt into my face. The night air was unnervingly still, wrong in a way you can feel in your bones. Even with adrenaline flooding my veins, I knew something was off. I led my 6-person recon unit into the undergrowth, moving fast but careful. We all carried the weight of what was supposed to be a clean extraction. The orders had been simple: retrieve Dr. Ford Harland, an intelligence asset captured by guerrilla fighters, and get out without leaving a trace. Command assured us the enemy presence would be light. I wanted to believe them, but experience had taught me, trust your gut over a polished briefing. The ground sucked at my boots with every step. The air clung to my skin like a wet shroud. I gave the signal for silence and spread the team into formation. Ruiz, my comms officer, kept close behind me, his radio gear humming. Kim and Dawson flanked left. Alvarez shadowed me on the right, eyes scanning the tree line with practiced precision. In that jungle, every sound felt magnified, the whisper of leaves brushing fabric, the faint click of a weapon's safety being eased off. I threw my fist up, signaling a halt, and dropped into a crouch. My fingertips pressed into the damp earth, feeling for even the faintest tremor. It was an old trick I'd learned from veterans: the ground will tell you its secrets if you're patient enough. But all I felt was the cold press of wet soil against my gloves. "Check bearings. Maintain line of sight," I murmured into my headset. My voice stayed steady, but my heart was hammering in my chest. Something ahead carried weight, a kind of watchful stillness, as though the jungle itself was holding its breath. I forced the unease aside and signaled the advance. The trail pinched tighter as we pushed on, branches clawing at our gear, the canopy choking out the last traces of moonlight. Every step dragged us deeper toward something I couldn't see but could feel building, like the air before a lightning strike. The ambush came without a hint of warning. One heartbeat the jungle was dead quiet, the next it erupted in a storm of gunfire. The crack of automatic rifles tore through the dark, shattering the silence like glass breaking inside my skull. I hit the ground without thinking, instinct snapping into overdrive as bullets shredded branches overhead. Contact. Left flank. I barked into the calm, my voice almost swallowed by the roar. I caught sight of Kim spinning, his rifle slipping from his grip as a round punched into his shoulder. The sharp tang of burning metal hit the air an instant before mines went off nearby. The blasts kicked the earth under us, choking the air with smoke and grit. I slid behind a fallen trunk, breath ragged, nerves raw. Return fire. Find cover. I shouted, waving Alvarez and Dawson in. The night collapsed into chaos, gunfire snapping past like tearing cloth, explosions thundering so close they rattled my teeth, voices screaming through the haze. Every gunshot was a shard slicing into my thoughts. I tried to focus, but the sound of my team crying out kept pulling me apart. A scream cut through the noise. Ruiz. He was only a few feet back, clutching his side, blood spilling between his fingers. Sparks jumped from the radio rig on his back before it died, severing our last link to command. I pressed my cheek to the mud, my pulse pounding in my ears. Stay with me. I yelled, crawling toward him, my hands slipping in the muck. Bullets chewed into the tree inches above my head, bark splintering and biting into my skin. We were boxed in, every escape covered. The enemy hadn't stumbled on us, they'd been waiting. Every second we stayed still was a gamble we couldn't win. A shot whipped past, so close I felt the heat graze my side, then the impact. A white-hot punch tore into my ribs, knocking the breath from me. My hand clamped instinctively over the wound, and I felt blood spilling warm through the fabric. Pain clawed up my spine, freezing me for half a breath, until Ruiz's voice ripped through the fog, terrified and desperate. He was sprawled in the open, blood pooling from his thigh. I bit down hard, forcing my body to move. Stopping meant we were done. Hold on, Ruiz. I barked, dragging myself forward, every inch a war against the fire burning in my side. My left arm shook violently, but I locked onto his vest and hauled with everything I had. The mud fought me, sucking at my knees, but I dragged him behind the fallen log, the only cover we had left. No time to think. Dawson was still out there, lying just beyond the tree line, his weapon out of reach. Rounds hissed overhead like angry hornets, but I crawled back out, ribs screaming, fingers locking around his harness. Inch by brutal inch, I pulled him in, knees tearing into the earth, lungs burning. A shot slammed into the ground beside me, showering my face with dirt, but I didn't stop until both men were behind cover. My vision wavered, but I pushed the dizziness aside. Stay low. Stay with me, I ordered, my voice trembling but firm. Ruiz and Dawson were fading fast, but we couldn't stay pinned. Alvarez was still moving, though a bleeding arm made him clumsy on the reload. I gripped his shoulder. We move now, I told him, low and absolute. He gave a tight nod, his face ghost pale under the faint light filtering through the canopy. The jungle felt alive with danger, every shadow a hunter, every rustle a warning. I heaved Ruiz up first, slinging his arm over my shoulder. Pain screamed through my ribs, hot and sharp. I bit into my glove to keep from crying out. The metallic tang of blood filled my mouth, but I wouldn't make a sound that could give us away. Keep moving, I hissed, urging Dawson and Alvarez forward as I dragged Ruiz through the tangled undergrowth. The weight of him threatened to crush me, but I forced each step. When we reached a pocket of relative cover, I set Ruiz down and went back for Dawson. He tried to argue, his lips trembling. You can't carry both of us, he rasped. Yes, I can, I snapped. There was no time for discussion. I hooked my arms under his and dragged him forward, ignoring the tearing agony in my side. My boots sank deep into the muck, leaving a trail of blood behind, but stopping wasn't an option. By the time I got back to Ruiz, my arms shook so hard I could barely grip my rifle. Almost out, I told them, whether I believed it or not didn't matter. My body was breaking down, but my will wouldn't. The jungle would not take them. The next thing I remember was waking in a world of white. The jungle was gone, replaced by sterile walls, the steady beep of monitors, and the low hum of machines. My chest burned with every breath, the pain radiating deep from my ribs. I tried to push myself up, but agony pinned me in place. A nurse appeared at my side, her voice gentle but unyielding. "Lieutenant Donovan, you need to stay still. You're safe now." Safe. The word felt alien. I turned my head, catching sight of the tight bandages wrapped around my torso, faintly stained with dried blood. "Your injuries were serious," she continued. "2 pieces of shrapnel remain lodged near your rib cage. Removing them would risk puncturing your lungs. The surgeons decided it's safer to leave them." Her words settled over me like a shadow. I glanced down, feeling the hard foreign shapes under my skin, a constant reminder that part of that night was still inside me. My fingertips brushed over the edge of the dressing, and the truth settled in like a stone in my chest. Those metal shards would never leave me. They'd live under my skin for the rest of my life, constant reminders carved into my flesh. The ambush still echoed through my bones, as if the jungle itself had branded me for making it out. A doctor stepped in to check my vitals. He didn't bother with false comfort. "You lost a dangerous amount of blood. If your team had gotten you out even 10 minutes later, you wouldn't be here. You'll recover, but the damage is permanent. The scars will be with you for good." When the room was empty again, I lifted the bandage just enough to see. The sight made me inhale sharply, ribs mottled with bruises, stitched wounds angry and raw. I pressed my palm to them, feeling both the ache and the proof that I had survived something no after-action report could ever hold. These weren't just injuries. They were a story etched into me, silent testimony to what we endured when no one believed we could. And in that sterile humming room, I made a promise: the truth of that night would never be buried. Weeks after the tribunal, when the whispers and speculation finally started to fade, I sat alone in my quarters, drowning in reports that spoke in neat, sanitized language. The mission was officially closed, smothered under bureaucratic layers. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that something was hiding just out of sight. That night, my laptop pinged. A new email appeared from an address masked behind random characters. The subject line was only 4 words: "Look deeper into Orion Systems." My hand froze over the mouse. Orion Systems, one of the largest defense contractors tied to our South Pacific operations. I'd seen their name on supply manifests, on encrypted comm relays, but I'd never looked closer. The message was just one sentence: "Your mission was not a failure. It was a test." A test. The word lodged in my chest like ice. I read it again, then again, each time feeling it cut deeper. There was an attachment, a compressed PDF stamped with the exact date and time of the ambush. I scanned for security risks, then opened it. Inside were scraps of intercepted transmissions, lines of coded commands, call logs, and satellite trajectory maps. Multiple entries referenced predictive drone mapping and the term live field variables. My stomach sank. This wasn't just an ambush. We'd been monitored, studied, as if our pain was part of some controlled experiment. The glow of the screen reflected off a framed photo of my unit, Ruiz, Kim, Dawson, their faces still haunting the corners of my quiet moments. Was our blood just numbers in a report to them? If Orion had manipulated the mission, then the kill zone wasn't an accident. It was designed. The next morning, my phone lit up with a call from an unlisted number. I answered cautiously, expecting a scam or silence. Instead, Admiral Hughes's voice came through, low and deliberate. "Lieutenant Donovan, we need to talk. Not here. Not on record. Observation deck. 1 hour." He didn't wait for me to answer. I arrived early, scanning the empty platform before Hughes emerged from the shadows. His face was taut, his tone certain. "You've been digging," he said, not a question. "And I think you found something I've been trying to verify." I pulled the encrypted file up on my phone, showing him the intercepted logs. Someone in this chain of command knew exactly what would happen that night. The ambush wasn't bad intel. It was staged, and Orion Systems was watching every step. He studied the screen, jaw tight. "This matches what I suspected," he muttered. "There's a leak high up. Someone authorized a mission they knew would fail, and then buried the proof. Your team wasn't just sent into danger, Donovan. You were bait." The words landed like a hammer, even though some part of me had already known. "Do you think my father knew?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Hughes paused. "I can't say. But I do know Harris, your father's old friend, sat on the final approval board. If there's a lead, it starts with him. The thought made my stomach turn. Harris had given me my first Navy Challenge coin when I was 15. Now, his name was tangled in this. I clenched my fist. If there's someone on the inside, we expose them. My team's blood won't be reduced to a footnote. Hughes nodded once. Then we dig. Quietly. Until there's nowhere left for them to hide. 2 nights later, as I sifted through the encrypted files again, another message dropped into my secure inbox. The sender called himself former Orion engineer. My pulse quickened. I opened it. There was a single audio file labeled Test Drone Debrief. Plugging in my headphones, I pressed play. A man's voice filled my ears, shaky, urgent. If you're hearing this, you need the truth. Orion Systems used your unit as a live trial. They were testing a predictive drone system, one meant to track and adapt to enemy ambush tactics in real time. Your mission didn't fail by chance. It was engineered. We were ordered to feed false intel to your command so the algorithm could learn in combat conditions. I went cold. When we saw the casualties, some of us protested, he continued, his voice cracking. We were told it was part of the data. Losses were acceptable. Collateral for progress. That's when I quit. I couldn't live with it. I stopped the playback, staring at the wall, my hands trembling. My team's agony hadn't just been overlooked, it had been designed. We were numbers in someone's equation. Ruiz. Kim. Dawson. Their faces burned behind my eyes, and for the first time in months, tears threatened. I forwarded the file to Hughes with one line, "This changes everything." Minutes later, he called. "This is the proof we needed," he said grimly. "Orion turned your mission into a weapons trial. This isn't just a cover-up, Donovan. This is criminal." I closed the laptop, fists clenched. For the first time since that night in the jungle, fear wasn't the sharpest thing inside me. It was anger, hot, focused, unshakable. There was no going back. I needed answers that no report could give me. So I drove to my father's house, the same place where he had polished his medals and drilled his lessons into me. He opened the door, surprise flickering across his face before his stern mask returned. "Dad," I said, my voice harder than I meant. "We need to talk." We sat in his study, walls lined with framed commendations and photos of him shaking hands with generals and senators. The silence between us was suffocating. I leaned forward, planting my hands on his desk. "I need to know," I said evenly. "How deep were you involved with the people who approved my mission? Did you know Harris was involved? Did you know what Orion Systems was doing?" My father's shoulders stiffened, his eyes shifting past me to the bookshelf over my shoulder. "Claire, this isn't the time or place for accusations," he said slowly. "It's not an accusation if it's true," I shot back. "You've been friends with Harris for decades. Did you know they used my team as test subjects?" My voice wavered on the last words, but I didn't let it slow me. He walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "War isn't clean," he muttered. "Sometimes choices are made. Compromises we can't undo." "That's not an answer. Did you know?" His silence was worse than any denial. He didn't turn around. The only sound was his sigh, heavy with something I couldn't name. Guilt, maybe. Or fear. I stood to leave. "I'll find the truth with or without you." He didn't stop me. Didn't say a word. The question I carried out of that room felt heavier than the scars under my ribs. Hughes didn't waste time once he had the Orion engineers recording. Within 2 days, he'd launched a quiet, targeted investigation. The next morning, I was called to his office. His expression was firm, but for the first time, there was a flicker of something almost like optimism. "We found irregularities in the mission approvals," he said. "2 officers, Commander Lee and Captain Morris, are suspended pending review. Their signatures are on altered data logs. This is our first real break, Donovan." Relief spread through me, heavy and warm. For months, I'd carried unanswered questions while whispers painted me as reckless or just lucky. For the first time, it felt like the truth was pushing its way through. "Does this mean," I started. "Not yet," Hughes cut in. "But it's a start. We keep pressing." Walking out of his office, the base felt different. Ruiz called that night, his voice soft but sure. "We knew you'd get to the bottom of it," he said. "You carried us then, and you're carrying this now." I smiled for the first time in weeks. I thought of the scars on my ribs, all the nights I'd stared at them wondering if they were marks of survival or something greater. Now, they felt like proof of persistence. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe. I imagined the day the people who sent us into that jungle would answer for it. But that moment didn't last. 3 days later, I woke to a storm on my phone, messages from officers, friends, even journalists. The headlines were brutal. Lieutenant Donovan under investigation, hero or liability. Another piece called me reckless, claiming my erratic decisions had cost lives. I didn't need to guess who was behind it. Orion had the money, the reach, and every reason to discredit me before Hughes's investigation dug any deeper. They were building a story, one where I wasn't a survivor, but a danger. Articles quoted anonymous sources who said I'd ignored safety protocols, led my team blindly into hostile territory. Reading them felt like watching my honor bleed out in slow motion. I slammed my laptop shut, my hand shaking. I called Hughes. "They're trying to bury me," I said, voice tight. "They're rewriting what happened." "I know," he replied, steady as stone. "Stay calm. This is exactly what they want, to shake you and weaken our case. We fight this with evidence, not emotion." But calm was hard to find when the poison spread inside the base. In the mess hall, I overheard 2 junior officers, one whispering, "Isn't she the one who got her squad killed?" I walked past without a word, spine straight, though inside, the sting cut deep. Years of building a reputation on precision and loyalty, undone in a few well-placed lies. Orion wasn't just protecting secrets. They were trying to erase me. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, tracing the scars on my ribs. To me, they were survival. But to the world, they were being painted as marks of failure. I realized I was in for a war far dirtier than the jungle. The worst hit didn't come from Orion. It came from my father. I was in Hughes's office when a news alert flashed across the monitor behind his desk. The headline slammed the air from my lungs. "Retired Colonel James Donovan speaks out. My daughter is obsessed, unstable, and not to be trusted." I read it twice, praying I'd misread. I hadn't. The article printed his full statement. He said I was fixated on conspiracy, that trauma had clouded my judgment, and that the Navy should protect itself from officers who can't separate pain from protocol. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. Hughes shut the screen off and said my name quietly, but it sounded far away, like he was calling from across a river. Something inside me gave way. Something that had survived the jungle, the tribunal, the smear campaign. It was the last thread of trust I'd had in him. I left without a word. The hallway felt colder than usual, each step echoing like a verdict. Outside, the sky was flat gray, the kind that makes the world feel unfinished. I sat on a bench near the flagpole, staring at nothing. He had spent years teaching me to push through pain without asking for comfort, to face humiliation without flinching. Now he was using those same lessons against me. His words replayed in my head until they blurred together, obsessed. Unstable. Not to be trusted. I pressed my palm to my ribs, feeling the outline of the fragments under my skin. Scars had carried me through silence before, but they couldn't shield me from this. Betrayal is quieter than gunfire. It doesn't tear flesh, it erodes the ground you thought was solid. When my phone rang, I didn't answer. Not Hughes. Not Ruiz. Not anyone. I stayed there until the sun dipped and the wind picked up, until I could breathe without shaking. Then I made myself a promise. If my father wanted to stand with the men who buried the truth, I'd stand alone and dig it up myself. That night, I spread every file, every log, and every recording across my table like pieces of a dismantled weapon. The burn of betrayal in my chest didn't paralyze me, it sharpened me. Orion could twist the story, but I'd make sure the truth cut deeper. My father could smear my name in every paper on base, but the raw truth was still mine, and I wasn't going to let anyone bury it again. All night, I worked. Radio logs. Satellite timestamps. The whistleblower's audio. Even photos of the scars across my ribs, not as symbols of pity, but as hard evidence of what had been done to us. Each file felt like a blade, honed to cut through the lies built around me. By dawn, My decision was made. I walked into Admiral Hughes's office, my steps deliberate. He looked up, narrowing his eyes like he already knew what was coming. "You've decided," he said. "Yes." I slid an encrypted drive across his desk. "We take this to the military council. No more side deals. No waiting for Orion to fire first. If they want a war of stories, they're going to hear the real one, in front of every ranking officer in this building." He studied me for a long moment. "You realize this could end your career?" "My career isn't worth more than the truth," I said without flinching. "Those men didn't bleed for me to stay quiet. My scars have to mean something." That afternoon, Hughes arranged a special council session. Outside the chamber, fear and anger burned through me in equal measure. This wasn't just my fight anymore, it was for every soldier who'd ever been treated as expendable. When my name was called, I walked in with my head high, the truth heavier than any uniform I'd worn. The council chamber was colder than I expected, a grey-lit amphitheater built on rank and restraint. I stood at the podium as the encrypted drive mirrored onto a secure screen. Timestamps. Radio logs. Uncut audio. They rolled in silence. You could hear the hum of the ventilation, the soft tap of a pen against a folder. My father sat in the front row, posture rigid, jaw set, a man holding his own history in place. I walked them through the gaps. Deployment recorded at 2,100. Boots on the ground at 2038. 40 minutes of missing comms during the deadliest phase of the ambush. Predictive drone terminology embedded in contractor chatter that never appeared in the briefings. When I played the Orion engineer's confession, several officers shifted in their seats. Hughes didn't move. He just watched the council watch me. "Lieutenant Donovan," one senior member said, "are you alleging that a private contractor deliberately manipulated a combat mission with cooperation from officers in this chain of command?" "I'm alleging the data shows exactly that," I said evenly. "The dead can't speak for themselves, so I am speaking for them." I felt my father's eyes on me. For once there was no dismissal in them, only tension and something colder, the fear of realizing the ground beneath you isn't solid. He glanced at General Harris, 2 seats away, but Harris kept his gaze fixed on the table. The council recessed for 10 minutes. I sat alone at the edge of the room, the ache beneath my ribs reminding me that pain isn't always physical. When they returned, the chair read the finding: "There is sufficient cause to open a full criminal and administrative investigation into Operation Hallard and associated contracting protocols." The words hit my father harder than they hit me. His shoulders sagged, not in defeat, but in surrender to the truth. I didn't celebrate. I inhaled slow, steady, bracing for the next fight. Evidence could open a door, but only resolve kept it from being slammed shut. When the floor was returned to me, I brought up the drone imagery, grainy but unmistakable. The first showed enemy staging crates stamped with Orion's logo, taken 12 hours before deployment. The second captured a predictive drone grid hovering over our landing zone, its targeting overlays alive in the data stream. "These were never in the mission archive," I said, letting my voice carry. "They were removed to protect Orion and whoever signed off." Cross-referencing the data logs with satellite feeds shows our coordinates were being transmitted in real time, as if my team was part of a controlled trial. I pulled up a timeline with the missing 40 minutes marked in red. "Here's where our comms went dark. Notice the spike in drone telemetry seconds before the ambush. Someone knew exactly what was happening to us, and they chose to watch." A ripple of murmurs moved across the table. Harris shifted in his seat, but my eyes stayed locked on my father. He leaned forward, gripping his knees, the unshakable mask on his face starting to crack. The judgment I'd lived under my entire life was gone, replaced by something heavier. "You can call me reckless or unstable," I said quietly, "but the data doesn't lie. The men who bled in that jungle were not collateral. They were my responsibility, and I dragged them out because no one else came." My father's gaze dropped to the floor. His jaw tightened, knuckles white. In that moment, I knew he finally understood. My scars weren't signs of weakness, but the price of being abandoned by a system he once believed in. A council member cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the contracting documents tied to Orion systems. There's a signature here that raises concern." His eyes swept the room before settling on the first row. "Colonel James Donovan, your name appears on the authorization for Orion's predictive drone testing program. Can you confirm this?" The air thinned. My pulse spiked. I turned to my father. He didn't meet my eyes. His face had gone pale, lips pressed tight. "Yes," he said at last, voice strained. "I signed the technology contract years ago. I believed it was harmless, limited to simulations, not live missions." The silence that followed felt like the oxygen had been stripped from the room. "You signed the contract that brought Orion into our command structure?" My voice broke on the question. "I didn't know they would use it like this," he said, almost pleading. His eyes finally rose to meet mine, and for the first time in my life, I saw them unguarded. Fear, shame, and the crushing weight of understanding. "I thought it was a training tool, Claire," my father said quietly. "I thought it would save lives, not take them." The council exchanged tense glances, whispers sparking between them. Anger rose in me, but under it was something sharper, the sting of realizing my father's blind trust had helped set this nightmare in motion. I stepped back from the podium, my hands steadying against the edge. "The men who died on that mission," I said slowly, "died because someone treated a battlefield like a laboratory. Whether you meant it or not, you opened that door." His head lowered, shoulders slumping as if the truth had struck harder than any round. The man who once called me worthless now looked like his own words were cutting him open from the inside. The silence was suffocating. He sat frozen, until to my surprise he rose. His tall frame seemed smaller under the weight of what he was about to admit. "I need to speak," he said, his voice breaking the stillness. Every eye turned toward him. My pulse quickened as he gripped the table for balance. "I signed the Orion contract," he began, voice rough, "because I believed in what they promised. I believed their tech would make our people safer, that no one else would have to see the losses I've seen. I was wrong." The room froze. Even Hughes, who'd weathered countless tribunals, sat back in silence. "I called my daughter a liability, a useless soldier, because I thought I was protecting the honor of this institution," he went on, his voice cracking. "But I failed her. I failed all of you. My blind trust in a contractor's words cost lives, and almost cost hers." My throat tightened. I'd waited my whole life for him to see me, not as his expectation in uniform, but as myself. And now that he was standing there, stripped bare, I didn't know what to feel. "I can't undo it," he said, faltering. "But I can admit my mistake." Claire fought harder than anyone here could imagine. She carried men through fire while I sat behind a desk believing a lie. The chamber was still. No pens moved. No whispers broke the air. His hands trembled as he sat again, face pale, eyes bright with something he'd never called tears. The man who had towered over me for decades now looked entirely human, flawed, fallible, and finally awake. The Pentagon hearing room was colder than the tribunal. Bigger. Heavier. Its walls carried decades of secrets. I sat at a long mahogany table, flanked by Admiral Hughes and 2 military council officers. Across from us, Orion's representatives looked immaculate, suits pressed, eyes unreadable, briefcases full of rehearsed denials. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a battle over truth, fought with contracts, clauses, and sharpened words. The chair of the Ethics Committee, a woman with steel-gray hair and eyes to match, opened with precision. "We are here to address allegations of ethical violations, falsification of mission data, and unauthorized human risk trials by Orion Systems. Lieutenant Donovan, you'll speak first." I rose, pressing my palms flat to steady them. "I led a team into what we were told was a low-risk extraction," I began, voice steady. "Instead, we were used as live data points in a predictive drone experiment run by Orion Systems. We were monitored, recorded, and abandoned when it spiraled out of control. The logs and recordings I've submitted prove it." One of Orion's lawyers cut in smoothly. "Your claims are speculative, Lieutenant. Drone mapping requires real-world data. Your losses are tragic, but they're the unfortunate byproduct of unpredictable combat, not intentional harm." Hughes leaned forward, his voice like steel on glass. "We've reviewed timestamp gaps, deleted logs, and a whistleblower's testimony. Your company erased evidence of a 40-minute ambush window. Are you still calling that unpredictable?" The tension in the room thickened. Committee members scribbled notes, their eyes shifting as the evidence landed. I caught sight of my father behind the legal table. He didn't look at me, but his hands were clenched, knuckles bone white. As I laid out drone imagery and intercepted transmissions, Orion's polished facade began to slip. For the first time, I felt the tide turning, not for me alone, but for every soldier without a voice in this room. When I spoke again, I didn't just press charges. I proposed a safeguard. This system needs a barrier, I said, my voice carrying across the chamber. I'm calling it the Callahan Clause, a mandatory protocol ensuring no contractor, no algorithm, and no corporate agenda can put soldiers in harm's way without full oversight. That means a review board of active field officers, real-time data transparency, and an absolute ban on live testing with unknowing combat units. No soldier should be treated like expendable hardware. Silence. Then the pushback came, smooth and calculated. A defense contractor rep leaned forward. Lieutenant, while your story is unfortunate, a clause like this would slow development and cost millions in delays. Would you sacrifice advancements that could save future lives? I didn't blink. How many lives are you willing to sacrifice in the name of efficiency? Because I've buried men who were reduced to data points. Your advancement almost killed me. You measure profit in dollars. I measure it in names I'll never forget. A congressman with deep defense ties jumped in. You're asking for oversight that could disrupt every contract we have with private defense. That's not realistic. Hughes cut him off, his tone icy. What's not realistic is expecting soldiers to trust a system that puts corporate deadlines over their lives. Donovan's proposal is sound. We've let contractors dictate too much for too long. I stood my ground, ribs aching under my uniform but voice unshaken. This isn't just about my team. It's about every soldier who trusts that their command won't betray them. We owe them this clause. The arguments on Orion's side grew sharper, but Hughes was ready. He rose, holding a sealed folder. We've obtained a declassified memo, he said, his voice steady but charged with steel. This document comes straight from Orion's own development team, Hughes said, laying the pages flat on the table. The council members leaned in, scanning the first lines as the text appeared on the secure display. My pulse slammed in my ears. Human control variables. Live field evaluation. Operation Hallard. The room went still. Hughes's voice cut through the silence. According to this memo, Lieutenant Donovan's unit wasn't just aware of Orion's testing, they were designated as the control variable. In plain terms, they were deliberately put in harm's way to measure how the drone algorithm performed against actual enemy resistance. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Even the Orion executives who had spoken so confidently moments before looked shaken. I clenched my fists beneath the table until my nails bit into my palms. It was one thing to suspect we'd been used, another to see it spelled out in black and white. Orion's lead representative shot to his feet, his voice cracking. That document is being misinterpreted. It's a hypothetical framework. Hypothetical. Hughes's hand came down hard on the table. Then why does it list Lieutenant Donovan's unit by name, with coordinates matching her ambush exactly? The man's mouth opened, but no words came. His colleagues shifted, their silence damning. The committee chair's gaze moved from me to the Orion bench, her expression granite. I leaned forward, my voice low but cutting. You called us variables. We weren't numbers on a screen. We were flesh, blood, and trust. And you destroyed all three. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. The truth had stripped away the polish. The final session felt different. The committee spoke with a conviction I hadn't heard before, each voice sharpened by the weight of what they'd read. Hughes stood beside me as the chair addressed the room. After reviewing all evidence, including the Orion memo and documented operational discrepancies, this council approves the Callahan Clause, effective immediately. The words hit like a wave. Months of silence, doubt and betrayal, and now change. My scars no longer felt like just marks of pain. They were the reason the system would never again turn soldiers into lab subjects. The Orion team sat ashen-faced. The council announced criminal charges would follow for those found complicit in falsifying mission data. For the first time, justice didn't feel theoretical, it was moving. That night, an envelope waited under my door. I knew the handwriting instantly. Claire, it began. I have no excuses. I thought I was protecting the system, but I see now I was protecting the wrong thing. I was blind to what mattered, your courage, your truth, and the men you saved when no one else came. I'm sorry for every word that cut you down instead of lifting you up. I read the next lines twice. I will testify against Orion. Whatever I believed before, I know now that accountability is the only way forward. You showed me scars aren't weakness. They're proof of a strength I never saw until now. By the time I finished, my throat was tight. I folded the letter and set it beside my uniform. I didn't know if we could mend what had been broken, but for the first time, I believed he saw me, not as the soldier who failed him, but as the woman who refused to be silent. One night, I stood in front of my mirror, the ceiling fan humming overhead. I lifted my shirt and traced the jagged lines along my ribs. They felt colder now, pieces of metal fused into my memory. I could still smell jungle rot, cordite, the metallic tang of blood. The ambush replayed in my mind, but it no longer owned me. Now, it was simply a reminder of why I had fought so hard to bring the truth forward. I had once seen these scars as proof of failure. Now they were my anchor, proof that survival sometimes means carrying what almost destroys you. I thought of Ruiz, Kim, Dawson, their lives cut short or forever altered. I whispered their names, a promise they would never fade into a footnote. A knock pulled me from my thoughts. Hughes's aide handed me an envelope. "Orders, Lieutenant," he said with a faint smile. Inside was a formal letter from the Naval Academy, an invitation to lead a new officer training program on ethics, operational readiness, and the hard lessons carved from Orion's failures. Reading it, something shifted. This wasn't about rank or ribbons anymore. It was about shaping leaders who would never let history repeat. That night, I wrote a single line in my journal: "Scars don't define me, but they remind me of the cost of silence." The Naval Academy auditorium was filled with young officers in crisp uniforms, faces bright with determination. I stood at the podium, scanning the room, feeling the weight of every scar, every night in the jungle, every lie I'd dismantled to get here. I rested my left hand over my ribs. "These scars," I began, voice steady, "are not medals. They're warnings. They remind me what happens when trust is broken, when lives are treated as expendable for the sake of progress." The room was silent. Pens were still. "I'm not here to inspire you with heroics," I continued. "I'm here to tell you that leadership isn't about glory. It's about carrying the weight of others when no one else will. It's about speaking the truth, even when the world calls you a liability." My eyes caught a young woman in the front row, the kind who might shatter if someone told her she wasn't enough. "You will be tested," I said softly. "Not just in combat, but in character. Your scars, whether the world sees them or not, will mark what you chose to protect, not what you let slip away." A wave of quiet resolve passed through the room. "If you remember nothing else from me," I said, my hand still on my side, "remember this: courage isn't being unbreakable. It's about knowing you can break, and still choosing to stand." The applause started small, then swelled until it filled the auditorium. I stepped back from the podium, not for recognition, but with the quiet certainty that maybe, at last, my scars were speaking for something greater than me. When the sound began to fade, I noticed a figure standing near the back of the room. My breath caught. Even without the uniform, I'd know those shoulders anywhere. My father. He wore a plain gray coat, his presence understated, almost uncertain. His eyes, once sharp, unyielding, were softer now, fragile in a way I'd never seen. I walked toward him. He didn't move at first, as if unsure he had the right. When I finally reached him, he straightened, clasping his hands tightly. And there, for the first time in my life, I saw tears in his eyes. "I came to listen," he said, voice rough. "Not to speak. I had to hear you for myself. And Claire, I was wrong. All of it. The things I said. The way I doubted you. I thought I was protecting you by being hard on you, but I see now I was just protecting my own pride." The words hit hard, not because they erased the pain, but because they carried the weight of a man who had finally stopped running from his mistakes. "I didn't need you to be proud of me," I whispered. "I just needed you to believe me." His jaw trembled. "I do. I believe you. More than I ever have. And I'll spend whatever time I have left making sure I never fail you again." The noise of the auditorium faded until it was just the two of us. No counsel. No accusations. Only the scars, visible and invisible, that had carried us here. He reached out, hesitant, and I let his hand rest on my shoulder. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the first step towards something better. Peace with the man who once defined my world. The hallway outside the Naval Academy's memorial wing was hushed, the air almost sacred. My boots echoed against polished floors as I passed the bronze plaques engraved with names of those who had given everything. I slowed at the newest section, where my name stood alongside my team's, not as a monument to death, but as a reminder of what we survived. My fingers traced the cool metal, my reflection bending in its shine. For years, I thought my scars were invisible to the world. Now, they were part of a story no one could erase. I rested a hand against my ribs, feeling the faint ridges beneath the fabric, and whispered to myself, some scars burn, but mine speak louder than silence. The thought settled deep, warm as a steady flame. This was no longer about revenge, it was about legacy. About ensuring the voices of those who never returned would live on in every cadet I trained, every lesson I passed forward. The Callahan Clause had been signed into doctrine just a week earlier. I carried that change like a promise. As I left the hallway, sunlight spilled through the academy's tall glass windows, bathing the grounds in gold. It felt like the world had exhaled. I took one last look at the plaque, lifted my chin, and walked forward, steady and unshaken. Because scars don't just mark where you've been. They remind you of what you swore you'd never allow to happen again.